webinar. So I want to first off thank you all for joining us. It is our last webinar before the new year, and I think you'll be very excited to join in on today's discussion. So the topic of today's webinar is helping community college students with children access child care support. And so before I go ahead and fully introduce the topic and introduce our great panelists, I just want to introduce the HED staff on today's webinar. So my name is Elissa Shobnek. I'm an Assistant Director of Programs at Achieving the Dream. Also here with me is Julian Haynes, the Associate Director of Programs and Policy at Achieving the Dream, and he's also the Project Director for the Working Family Success Network and Community Colleges Expansion. So I'm thrilled to introduce today's panelists from the Institute for Women's Policy Research. Today we have Barbara Gault, the Vice President and Executive Director, and Lindsay Ricklin, the Research and Programs Coordinator. And so the Institute for Women's Policy Research conducts rigorous research and disseminates its findings to address the needs of women, promote public dialogue, and strengthen families, communities, and society. And as I'm sure you likely saw in our most recent WFSN CSLE monthly newsletter, the Institute for Women's Policy Research recently published 2 new fact sheets focused on the 4.8 million undergraduate students raising dependent children and the pressing needs that often affect their persistence and success in college. And so I just want to take a moment and share some of the findings from the fact sheets to help begin to frame our webinar today. And so the findings say that while the number of college students with dependent children has been growing and more than 1 in 4 college students in the United States are raising children, campus-based child support has been declining. Less than half of all public 2-year institutions offer campus child care services, where nearly half, 45% of students, to be exact, with children are enrolled. So as I'm sure you all know, child care can be prohibitively expensive, and the time and money devoted to child care can threaten a student's ability to persist in college. And so it'll be critical that improving access to child care for students with children, being a likely contributor to increasing the relatively low levels of college persistence and degree attainment seen among low-income parents. And so this really directly aligns with the income and work supports pillar of the WFSN strategy. And on today's webinar, Barbara and Lindsay will discuss trends in child care access on community college campuses, child care policy affecting college students in the WFSN CC states, and examples of strategies colleges have used to help students find affordable care. And so before I give the floor over to Barbara and Lindsay, I just want to add that oh, I'm sorry, I see that you're seeing the poll question right now. Sorry, I just saw the question. Let me fix that for you. Okay, can everyone see the webinar panelist slides? If someone could just respond to the questions or raise your hand and I can unmute you. I'm sorry, this Okay, can everyone see the slide now? I'm so sorry about that. Well, miss seeing our beautiful faces, but now you can see Barbara and Lindsay, so I'm very sorry. So just the last thing I was going to say was that, well, one, I really appreciate you all using the question pane, but just feel free to ask questions or provide comments, but I just ask that if you could please pose them to the whole group, so just don't send them privately, just so that Lindsay and Barbara will be able to see them, and it'll help us make it more of an interactive webinar. And so you've already, done a great job with that so far, and I do apologize for the slide mishap, but everything is working smoothly now, so I appreciate it. So with that, I'm just going to go ahead and give the floor to Barbara and Lindsay to get us started on today's topic.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Alyssa, for putting this together and for giving us the opportunity to talk to colleges in the network. It's really nice for us to have an opportunity to start to get to know all of you. We have an interest in childcare on community campuses because of our project called the Student Parent Success Initiative, which has been going on for a number of years now. We originally got funding from the Gates Foundation to look at the prevalence of students with children in college, what their challenges are, what some policies would look like to help them succeed in college, and to study and try to share knowledge about the sorts of supports that different programs around the country are using to help students with children succeed. Next slide, please. So this slide just talks about the goals of our Student Parent Success Initiative. And the next slide shows some tools that we've put together as a part of that effort that we hope can be helpful to colleges who want to improve childcare access. So one of them is called Varieties of Campus Childcare, and that one just kind of goes through the different types of systems and models that we've seen campuses use to provide childcare, and they really range all over the place, from states that have statewide systems, like California. It has one of those, as we understand it, and then many colleges who have childcare on campus might have a single child care center on campus, whereas others may not have any child care on campus at all, but may help students by giving them vouchers for child care, or they may have a resource and referral network on campus where they refer students out to available care. So there's quite a lot of variety there, and we give examples of each type of system that we've seen from both four-year and community college campuses. And then the resource financing childcare just talks about what colleges have been doing, like how they paid for it, which includes a lot of different sources, and we'll talk a bit about that. And then another resource looks at supports for student parents more broadly, not just childcare, but things like transition to college classes that are specifically geared toward non-traditional students and that really reach out to and recruit single mothers, and things like student organizations that that work to provide a welcoming campus for students with kids. And we've also, one of our tools is on our website, where we're just gathering information about different student parent support programs at colleges around the country and getting them up online so that people can see examples of different types of programs and supports that specifically reach out to student parents. So we wanted to make sure that you know about that. And we here at the Institute for Women's Policy Research have a grant from the Kellogg Foundation to work with the WFSN colleges to help them think specifically about the child care part of bundled service delivery, which we think is one of the most challenging things to help students with. So we would like to help all of you in any ways that we can, and we have some ideas about what we might be able to do, but I wanted to just set that up because you could be thinking about the sorts of help that you need in terms of either information or surveys or help developing relationships with child care professionals or organizations, that kind of thing. So we're going to start by presenting some of the research that we've done and the data that we've collected about students with children and about the availability of child care. Then we're going to talk about what we understand about child care policies in the WFSM states and the prevalence of campus child care at your specific colleges. And then we're going to run through some of the strategies that we think can work to help improve child care access and talk a little bit more depth about other student-parent supports. And I'd really like to hear what you all have tried, what your comments are in terms of some of the suggestions that we're making. Part of our grant is really to use this as a learning opportunity so that we can understand how to make better recommendations to colleges about improving child care access and also to improve policy. So, we want to learn from you, and we hope that all of you can learn from each other, and we'd like to help set up conversations about the child care side of things specifically. So, just feel free to type a comment throughout if you want to share something about what you're doing or if you have a question or a reaction. I'd really like to engage. So next slide, please. So one of the big findings of our research, which probably is not going to shock any of you, but does tend to shock a lot of people, is that there are a lot of college students who have kids. And on the whole, it's about 26% of all college students are raising dependent children. And that proportion is especially high in community colleges. And so at public two-year colleges, you see that 30% of the students have kids. And we feel in general that this issue needs a whole lot more attention than it gets, and that there are more things that communities and that federal education funding could be focusing on to make colleges more family-friendly, to really help address the real challenges that parenthood brings to students, both in terms of the financial responsibilities, the time it takes to take care of kids, in addition to often balancing work too. And because of all that, what our research has shown is that students with children among all demographic groups are the least likely to complete college of anyone. And so we're kind of hoping to draw attention to this and to learn about new solutions that can help and propose those and to engage with policymakers as well as practitioners. We're kind of happy because there have been a few news stories recently that have featured the situations of student parents and their child care needs. There was one profile in the Washington Post just a couple weeks ago, which was terrific, and then something that just came out in the Atlantic magazine today that's focused on students with children. So we do think it's starting to get noticed. Next slide, please. So, another way of looking at this data is to look at where those students who are parents are, and you see that if you take all student parents, most of them are at community colleges, so 45%, and that's why we think that's a good place to focus on if we're going to be trying to help students with children. All right, next slide, please. There's a big gender difference in parenting responsibilities. So the vast majority of students with children are mothers. There are many fewer fathers on college campuses, and 58% of student mothers are single mothers. So again, maybe all these statistics pretty much ring true to what you all observe all the time, but I think looking at them speaks to the kinds of needs that many students have that just aren't being addressed. So, if you're a single mom trying to get a degree and working and all that, pretty tough. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, next, back to the next one forward. Okay, good. This slide shows some research that we did looking at the financial circumstances of students with children. And on one measure, unmet financial need, you can see the red bars are the students with children, and that women with children are the ones with the highest levels of unmet financial need. Another reason to focus more on this population. Okay, next slide, please. So we were also able to really quantify the time demands on students raising kids, looking at the survey of community college student engagement. And what we found is that 60% of women who are raising kids in college are spending 30 or more hours per week taking care of their kids. So that's a huge time demand that takes away from their ability to study and go to school, and more childcare would help with that. Next slide. So, Elisa, are you going to be just putting the poll questions out, or do I need to signal to you that we should do that?
Yes, so if you can just let me know when you want the poll questions launched, I can go ahead and do that.
Okay, so yeah, why don't we do one now, which is the one about, does your college look at or share data on how many students have children? Because one of the things that we've heard is that in general, colleges, while they might be able to get those data from the financial aid office, they often don't look at that, and they don't really know how many or what proportion of their students have kids. So I was just wondering if you all look at that data at your colleges.
Great. So some more people need to vote. We're at about 60% right now. So please continue to send in your responses. A few more people. Great, thank you.
All right, so most say no. A fair number say yes, but so maybe that's something we could all think about working on together, is just seeing if those data are available for the colleges. I know that the National Survey of Community College Engagement does have those data for the different colleges, so we might be able to get some of that. It could be interesting. Okay, so childcare is very, very expensive, and it can often be as expensive as tuition. The range for full-time center-based childcare goes from anywhere from $3,900 a year to $15,000 per year. So financially, that could pose a real threat to students' ability to afford college. And it's so much money. Anybody who has a kid is aware of this. But that, especially for low-income families, it ends up being a huge proportion of their family income that they have to spend on childcare. So for those below poverty, it's 40% of their income. And for low-income families at 100 to 200, it's 17%. And one of the things we've discovered is that when students with children fill out the FAFSA, the income protection allowance really only protects about $5,000 of income for each child that you have. And, you know, that's just not enough. I mean, that might be enough in some states to cover the cost of childcare, but there are a lot of other expenses associated with having a child as well. So that's one of the areas that we're thinking about in terms of federal advocacy, but also I think it's good for financial aid administrators and others to be aware of, you know, how little that's actually taken into account in terms of income protection. So next slide. We have been studying the availability of campus childcare and found that it is declining, despite the fact that the number of students who have kids in college has been increasing. And the funding source for this, the usual funding source for campus childcare, or one of the common sources, the C-Campus program, the funding has essentially been stagnant for a number of years. And so our data show that about 46% of community college campuses have childcare on campus. But even for those that do, there's often a waiting list. So the presence of a childcare center doesn't necessarily mean that students are going to be getting childcare there. In fact, you know, we found that the average wait list size of a campus childcare center is about 70 to 100 students, and that the available campus childcare is only meeting about 5% of the total need. Next slide, please. So we looked at the federal data that's available to try to see which of the campuses has in the WFSN network has a child care center, and this was the data that we came up with. And it looks like, if this is correct, this is from 2012, that the rates are about the same as the national average if you look across the network. But let us know if any of this is incorrect, either if there was a center and it's closed, or whether we're saying there isn't a center but there actually is. Next slide, please. So we are going to be, for each of the WFSN states, providing a scan of the child care subsidy rules and requirements. And this shows you a little bit of our preliminary findings. And again, you all may be familiar with this, but this shows the income cutoffs to be eligible for child care subsidies. And you can see that they're fairly comparable across states in terms of the state median income. But that ends up getting to a really different level of poverty depending on which state that you're in. Next slide, please. So even when states have fairly generous eligibility rules for child care subsidy, many states, 18 of them overall, have wait lists. And we looked at the presence of waiting lists within the WFSN states. And the only one that doesn't have a waiting list is Washington State. So, you know, that poses a real challenge in that you could help someone apply for child care subsidy, but it doesn't mean that they're going to get it. And also, there are some reasons to think that students are going to have a harder time getting a child care subsidy than somebody who's just working. You can see that the percentage of child care subsidy recipients in education and training varies from state to state, and in some it's pretty low. So while Washington State doesn't have a waiting list, there's a very low proportion of college students or training participants who are actually getting child care subsidy. And then we also looked at availability and access to pre-K across the states, which varies quite a bit, with participation in Arkansas looking quite high and in Washington quite low. And one of the things we want to do next is to do some in-depth research on what the work requirements are for child care subsidy receipt in each of the states. And we've started to do that, and it's pretty complicated. And Lindsay's going to talk a little bit about what we're finding so far.
Hi there. So if we can just go to the next slide. We did a little research into the specific eligibility requirements in Washington State. I kind of feel like what I went through was somewhat like what a student parent would be going through, trying to find out if they were eligible. Of course, I had a little bit more knowledge of the situation, but needless to say, it was a complex process, and not all the information was available on the state website for what I could find. What we did find is, you can see on the slide, so employment is basically always required, but there's no minimum work hours. If you are a student, you have to be working at least 20 hours a week to be eligible for subsidies. So for students who are not working, which, work can often affect persistence and success, so, spending more time in school is great. However, if they're not working, it's a lot harder to access child care subsidies. If you're a student and you're a TANF recipient, you can work with your TANF caseworker to apply for subsidies and for them to access, to make you eligible for receiving child care assistance. For students who are eligible for and receive benefits from the BFET program, the Basic Food Employment and Training Program, can become eligible again through their caseworker at the school. But to be eligible for BFET, you also can't be receiving TANF or SNAP, and you have to be getting certain types of credentials and be in certain types of programs. So you can't be getting a general associate's degree, for example. It's connected more to job training type programs from our understanding. So as Barbara pointed out in the previous slide, there's a very small percentage of students who are actually receiving child care assistance, probably partially because it's pretty difficult for them to do so. And to be honest, a lot of this information is not readily available on the internet from what I could find. And I spent a good amount of time looking for it. So you have to have more in-depth knowledge of the programs that are available and how through those programs you can finagle your way towards child care assistance. But needless to say, it's a complicated process.
Yeah. So there's a question here. Does working count as subsidized and unsubsidized employment? So I'm not sure if by subsidized and unsubsidized that means subsidized, eligible for a child care subsidy, or if you're speaking of some other subsidized employment program.
Yeah, I didn't come across anything that talked about this in my research yesterday, but maybe that's in some kind of employment program, or welfare to work type thing.
Yeah, but students can get child care for the time that they're working, if that's the question, as well as the time that they're in school, if that ends up being allowed to count as work. And I think that is what gets to be the challenging part from state to state. I think from our initial research, it seems that of the WFSN states, Washington might be the one with the strictest work requirements for college students. But we're going to try to get more detail and provide you all with some fact sheets and tools, although you all may have already figured it all out too, in which case let us know and we'll call you. All right, so maybe now we could ask you all some polling questions about what you see as the demand for child care on campus and how easy or difficult it has been for all of you to help students find that. So could we go to polling question number 2? How is our voting going, Elisa?
We have about 50% of the people that have voted so far.
Okay. Keep voting.
So we're at about 70, so just a few more people.
Okay. All right. That's interesting. Some are saying that the demand is only moderate, and others don't, that they don't know. And that is potentially something, if you're interested in knowing about the demand, we developed a student survey that asks about the need for different services that we fielded in the state of Mississippi. And the report from that survey is available on our website, the portrait of women in Mississippi community colleges. It wouldn't have to just be women, but we could potentially do some work on the demand for childcare. Okay, so let's do the next polling question since they're so fun. And that one is looking at, you know, how easy or difficult it's been to help students find childcare. So vote quickly, everybody, so that we can see our results.
We're just shy of 50, so a bunch more people, please vote.
Stop doing your email and vote.
We're at about 70, so just a few more people, and then we'll share the results.
Okay. So very challenging. But for a few, it's very easy. And I'm hoping that those who said that will talk at the end and tell us why that's so and how you're doing it. All right. Why don't we move along here? Next slide, please. All right, so here is what we have come up with from the tools that we put together and some of our initial thinking on the other kinds of things that colleges can do to help students access childcare. And you know, in a way, some of this is working hypotheses, and some of this is based on surveys of campus childcare programs. But so I'd be interested to hear later if any of you have tried any of these things, or if any of them seem unrealistic or like good ideas. But so clearly, if there's a campus childcare center, having a relationship with them between, you know, the financial aid office, if there's an office for the WFSN initiative, et cetera, that's probably a good idea. Because even if they don't have openings, they might have relationships with other slots in the community or babysitting networks and that kind of thing. A lot of colleges that we've studied actually have relationships with family child care networks out in the community, or family child care providers, because of the cost of center-based care, a lot of students either end up using family members like grandma or an aunt, or child care that's taking place in people's homes. And you know, a lot of that care is licensed, and some colleges have, you know, put together lists of those providers and made them available to students. Some colleges have liability concerns about doing that. The University of Michigan, I would say, is a great example. It's not a community college, but they have figured out like calm the lawyers down about that and to get around it. So another strategy is to make a connection with any local and state child care resource and referral programs. Some of those are situated on colleges themselves, but they generally can help students find affordable care. We can try to put together lists of programs like that to share with you all if you don't already have that information. Some colleges give vouchers and scholarships specifically for childcare, and those could vary in amount. So it seems like even for colleges that aren't doing that right now, it could be something that could be considered, as something as an alternative to an emergency fund, or sometimes it's funded out of student fees and a lot of other places. And sometimes, a nominal amount of money could make a big difference. And also it's flexible, so it's not like you have to find the slot for the person. They can use that money for the situation that works best for them. And then we'd like to, help facilitate relationships between, say, child care centers that have a lot of openings in the community, if there are some, and the colleges. And one of the overall goals of our project is just to facilitate those relationships more broadly, like to create more links between early care and education systems, both at the state, local, and federal level, and colleges and community colleges, because we think there are a lot of shared goals. There are a lot of ways they could be working together more. So in the WFSN communities, if it would be helpful to set up a meeting with, a state child care administrator and some child care providers and some of the student service staff or the financial aid staff, and just talk about, hey, we've got all these students who need child care. What can we do to make it more accessible to them? How can we make it easier? How can we, speed the process of getting child care subsidies, to make that more of a concerted effort and conversation. And then, some colleges provide resources to students either on their websites or through brochures and things like that, with contact information for the resource and referral agencies for where they go to apply for child care subsidies, and then babysitting networks, family child care providers, or specific centers and pre-K providers. So those are some suggestions that we're starting out with. And we're also planning to survey other bundled service initiatives like single-stop programs around the country, the benefits to access for community college programs, and hear about what has worked for them with respect to child care, and what strategies they would recommend for the WFSN network. So I think here we can do another poll question. Yay, as a researcher, I love this stuff because I just love data. But so could we launch poll question number 4? And this is about, which of the following child care resources does your campus currently provide? Check all that apply. And I guess we didn't put a don't know on here, so maybe those could go under other, other don't know. How's our voting, Alyssa?
We're at about 70 right now, just a little bit.
Too bad.
Just a few more people.
Yeah. A good bunch of us are awake. Okay. Okay. Interesting, interesting. So about a third provide subsidies for childcare. That's interesting. I would like to hear about that as well. So there are a mix of strategies, and yeah, so there's a lot that people are already doing. Good. All right, next slide. So, one of the things that we do ultimately hope to be able to do is to increase the supply of childcare on community college campuses. And if any of you are interested in starting to think about that, like if there is childcare, to expand it or to set up a center or develop a relationship with a center where there isn't childcare on campus, we'd be happy to start thinking about that as well. Talking about the need, starting to think about how it could be structured or facilities and that kind of thing. So for that reason, we just wanted to share with you some of the ways that campus child care centers have financed their services. And there's a range of sources, federal, state, and local. Some colleges pay for it. Some have foundations that pay for it. Like I mentioned before, a lot of colleges use a portion of student fees to help pay for childcare. So just wanted to throw this out there as a point of information. Next slide. And there are other things that colleges can do to make student parents feel more welcome and supported. And some is, a lot of colleges we've talked to said that parents can just feel a little bit like under the radar, like nobody really knows they exist. So there are a number of programs out there that have events for parents with their kids. They might have dinners. There might be outreach at orientation at a women's center, flyers on campus reaching out to students with children. And some have resources on campus like family-friendly study rooms and access to facilities for kids as well as parents. And one example is University of California at San Diego. And that's actually run by a student group, which a lot of colleges have organizations of student parents. So less common at community colleges for obvious reasons. Next slide. And then, as I mentioned before, some colleges have transition classes that are credit-bearing that do recruit single mothers or really target single parents and address a lot of the challenges that they're facing and ways to get services, ways to get support, and it kind of provides an environment where students can talk to each other and build a community and share strategies. But we do have a toolkit that gives examples of a lot of different kinds of supports for students with children. Next slide. All right, so last, we just wanted to wrap up by letting you know the kinds of things we thought we could help with if you're interested. We're here. We're happy to come travel to where you are and visit your college if that would be good. But Lindsay were you going to kind of run through some of these strategies? Sure. Poor Lindsay has a terrible cold, so yeah. We're trying to limit her talking today.
Well, let's see. So, yeah, as Barbara said, we have a range of ideas as to what might be helpful to the colleges to kind of think about the issue of childcare and increasing access for students. So some of these include conducting a scan of local childcare programs and providers. As Barbara mentioned previously, we have a student parent survey that can serve, and we can also conduct a need assessment in the same vein. Again, providing lists and guides to local resources for childcare, including things like lists of the local resource and referral networks, centers with available slots, et cetera. Again, kind of, we're happy to delve into the subsidy eligibility rules and guidelines for your state, and looking at it from the perspective of a student and a parent, and trying to figure out what what counts and how they can get access. So facilitating state and local strategy meetings for child care and community college leaders. We realize that sometimes, arranging meetings with a bunch of different folks in kind of different arenas can be time-consuming and not something that everybody necessarily wants to delve into. We're happy to facilitate that and be a liaison between the colleges and any other, as Barbara stated, the state child care administrators and other individuals in the communities that could, the collaboration of which could be very beneficial for students and child care access. And that kind of goes into the next one, host conversations on child care strategies and lessons learned among WFSN colleges. So talking about those of you who have, an easy time providing child care, which is fantastic, and kind of gathering some best practices to share, as well as sharing, the challenges faced by all of the colleges and trying to figure out as a group ways to overcome them. So, and again, we're open to ideas. So the more, we can interact with you guys and think about other ways that we can help, we'd love to do that.
And that's all we've got in terms of our presentation, but we'd very much like to hear everybody. Oh, wait, we have one more poll question, right? We have a poll question about which of these things would be helpful. I know you always get sad thinking that polls might be over. All right.
We actually have 2 polls left. So,
oh, do we?
The first, yes. They kind of go hand in hand just because the technology doesn't support as many responses as we needed. So go ahead and answer the latest poll that should be on your screen. So we're at about 73, so maybe just a couple more people.
Okay. This is very helpful to hear what would be most useful. Okay. And then there's another one, right?
Yep.
And this one's, are you interested in joining or hosting conversations on child care strategies and lessons learned among the WFSN colleges? Which, I mean, this is one of, but we'd like to do more as we learn about what the colleges are doing. For example, like we could make this a topic at the February conference.
Great.
Okay. Great. So sounds like it's probably worth doing. So now I'd just really like to open it up and to hear from folks about what specific challenges you might be experiencing, or for the colleges that are pretty strong in this area, to share how you're doing things. I think would be great. Or if there are other kinds of assistance that might be useful, to mention that. So love to hear from folks.
Great.
So
So
I guess
there are just a couple of different ways you can ask questions. You can ask the question through the question pane, and I can read it out loud. I really encourage people to raise your hand, and we can unmute you so it can be a little bit of interactive. We had some great success on our last webinar after some prodding by myself. So I'm happy to prod people and push them to want to talk to us. Otherwise, if you are multitasking, please just, send away a question to us, and or even just a comment or a thought. I think, I have a question for Barbara and Lindsay. I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the student survey you fielded in Mississippi and some interesting lessons learned. I'm happy to share that resource with all of the colleges after the webinar, but just interested to learn a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it was a survey that we did in a collaboration with the Women's Foundation of Mississippi, and we got the cooperation of the Mississippi Community College Board. So they let us field the survey at all of the colleges, which was great, and we got a sample of about 550 completed responses from women. It was a pretty comprehensive survey. One of the things, from the standpoint of this particular topic that we found most interesting was that for those students who had stopped out, a quite high proportion had stopped out because of child care challenges. I think it was, 28%? Something like that. And it was pretty interesting just to see which services people were satisfied with and where they were having more challenges. Transportation was a huge issue. I mean, especially, in Mississippi, that's a fairly rural state. So it was helpful to feed the results back to the colleges and to give them something to be thinking about in terms of developing new programs. That particularly was linked to a grant program that the Mississippi Women's Foundation was running. So they were getting an opportunity for money to address some of the challenges that women said they were experiencing.
Great. That'll definitely be a resource I'll share after the webinar, and if there's anything else you'd like the colleges to have, if you want to send that to me as well, I'll make sure to forward that along.
Okay. So people are being shy. Is that what's going on?
Yeah. I actually think Debbie King, I'm not sure if you just have your hand raised from before or if you have a question, but I can go ahead and unmute your line. Debbie, did you have a question or a comment? You should be unmuted now and able to talk to the group, unless that was a raised hand by accident. Okay, I think it was a raised hand by accident.
Okay. So does anyone care to share a successful strategy in terms of helping students find childcare? All right. All right, well.
Perhaps one of the Washington colleges. I know some of you are on the call, and I've heard some strategies that I'm hoping maybe one of you will like to share.
If not, we can. Yeah,
Edward Esparza from the State Board of Community and Technical Colleges in Washington would like to share. So, Edward, I'm going to unmute your line. As long as your phone is not muted, you should be able to go ahead and chat. Oh, great.
Well, one of the pieces that I work with through our Washington system, and we are a system of 34 community and technical colleges, and in our system we have what is called the Washington Campus Children's Center Coalition, which I staff with that group. One of the things that they do as part of their work plan is they surveyed some of, they did this about a year ago, where they surveyed students that were attending colleges on their respective campuses, and what they found was that the students that had children in daycare had a tendency to do much better academically than some of those that did not. And the rationale behind that, at least in working with this group in this survey, was that the student had the opportunity to be engaged in an activity on their campus, that activity being involved with their daycare centers, just like they would as if they were in a student leadership or a club or an organization, where that student engagement principle or theory seemed to hold true with daycare centers as well. Another piece was the students had a very close attachment to the daycare centers, to where if they might have a break during the day, they were able to come and say hello to their child. All of the daycare centers are on the campuses in our system, and so they might be able to come by and do that. And so that was, in their mind, was a stress reliever for them. The one thing that's interesting in our system is that some of our daycare centers are organizationally listed under student services, and some of them are under instruction, and which is kind of interesting. So there's a prioritization, at least when the daycare centers receive funding, whether it's through student fees or an allocation through a specific division, instruction or student services, of what that priority is. Many of the daycare centers, and I try to visit as many as I possibly can, are new, but what has happened with the daycare centers in Washington, many of them have moved over to a third-party operator. They're no longer college employees of that respective college, but they are contracted employees that are working. And you hear a lot of voice about that as well. Networking, there is a lot of networking challenges that our group looks at, and I'm sure that this probably holds true in many communities, is addressing the wide variety of diversity that utilize the daycare centers. Many different languages being spoken at the daycare centers, so there's a lot of nuances on there to find ancillary type help to address those communications needs in those areas. And I would suggest that this might be a challenge for those that are in the Washington State Consortium for the Working Families Network, is that we look at not only who we have, but who are some of those partners, community partners, that are offering these services that would be culturally competent to provide services out there. So that might be a challenge in that respect. I don't know yet. I haven't talked to people in our consortium about this, but it's very interesting. It's a very interesting dynamic, and I'm curious to see how this shakes out going forward.
Wow, that's fantastic. We would love to get our hands on that data about the child care making a difference, because there's almost none out there. So it'd be great to see it. Do you know if it's available?
I believe it is available. I had a graduate student ask me for that some time ago, and I was able to connect them with the keeper of that information. So I think it is available. And I think, you know, as a group of 34 colleges, not just the WFS, the Working Families Network, but as a group, they would be very interested in working with your group, because they're constantly wanting to raise the bar on their research as a system type entity.
Okay. Yeah, that would be, I think, a fabulous connection for us to make. That sounds terrific. Does anybody want to throw out any specific challenges they're having around the child care access piece that, you know, others in the group may be able to help with?
Great. So we've had a question shared, and so I'll read it. It's from North Arkansas, and it says, I think the biggest problem for our centers on the 20, for us centers on the 20 work hours per week required for students to receive daycare assistance while we only allow 15 hours a week max as work study. That forces our students to get outside jobs, which makes being a full-time successful student and full-time parent even harder. Do you foresee any changes to the policy in the near future?
Well, you know, we'd really like to work on that. We put together recently a group called the Student Parent Policy Working Group, and it includes, I mean, you all probably know Amy Ellen, Duke Benfield at CLASP, and some other people, as well as some state leaders. And, you know, this would be a great idea, I think, for us to try to look at the WFSN states specifically to try to make a change there. I mean, that's a very specific, concrete problem that's, I mean, it's kind of nonsensical. You know, it's just putting hassles in people's way that are completely unnecessary that might not be that hard to change. So yeah, I mean, I could see us making a difference there, trying to work on it. I could.
So does anyone else perhaps want to share challenges or additional questions?
I mean, you know, and one thing there is, would you want to reduce the work requirement or increase the maximum work study? I mean, I guess I don't know if the work study is a federally determined thing, but I think the most useful thing would be to reduce the work requirement. I mean, it's very counter to our national goals to increase attainment. You know, if people are going to have to work while they're in college, their chances of success are so much less.
I had another question, Chair. So this is from Cabrillo College, and they're in California. And they've said, we've had challenges with finding sick care and even care for our students. Has anyone been successful in setting up that type of service?
There are some, I know that there are some examples of that. I think others should speak up if they've had success. We do have some examples of that in the toolkits that we've put together. You know, I think there have been some of the colleges that have tried evening care say the take-up tends to be kind of low. To me, giving people flexible subsidies that they could use in a setting that's convenient for them, like to have just a babysitter at home, could be helpful. Others have set up childcare in the library so that students can study and their kids could be in a place that's central. And the regulations are a lot more lax if the parents are actually on site. So there have been some strategies with that. I mean, for programs that have a lot of evening classes, there are examples of hospitals, for example, that have care that goes late into the evening, and we could provide some examples of that. But that's, you know, center-based care, which is expensive. But we could try to look for examples of that and send them along to you if nobody else has their own suggestions on how they've dealt with it.
So the response is that it would be great to get those resources. So thank you, and I can share all of that after the webinar if you want to send that over to me.
Okay. Great. Any other comments or discussion items?
Another question asked is, you know, it's a challenge to keep up with new standards of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act is there any information that you can think of that we can share for that relevant to childcare?
Not at the moment. We are going to be actually looking at that. I know that the regulations for that have not yet been written, and that they are seeking input for those regs, and we're going to be weighing in to try to encourage the use of the funds for child care purposes. But no, that's another one where we might need to get back to you as to what might be pertinent in terms of the regulations. And we can also check with others like Amy Ellen and see if she's got any intel on that we could share.
Great. Those are all the questions I see right now. Barbara or Lindsay, do you have any additional questions you'd like to ask the colleges?
No, I would just like to say, thank you so much for your attention and your time and your patience. And we really encourage you to reach out to us, give us a call. We'd like to just be your foot soldiers and try to help out in whatever way we can. And we'll be getting back to you with information to follow up. And we're here for you, and we're looking forward to meeting everybody in person in February.
Great. So first off, I want to thank Barbara and Lindsay for giving a great webinar. I hope you all enjoyed it. And so the webinar is being recorded and will be shared, and I'll have the PowerPoint slides to share as well. And so I want to thank you all for attending and wish you all a happy holiday season, because this is our last webinar for the year. And just as one final follow-up, as I mentioned on our last webinar, you will be getting your feedback letters to your implementation plans, before December 23rd. So please be on the lookout for that. And thank you again for joining us, and have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everybody. Happy holidays.